Okay.
Bienvenidos. Ximena, ¿me escuchas?
Sí, te escucho.
Podemos empezar.
Muy bien. Entonces, empiezo con la introducción.
Sí, Carmina está
I'm going
lista.
to switch to English for this part of the introduction. What an amazing moment we are living in. It seems like we are all inside a movie written by some crazy writers. This pandemic is all about emotions and has taken out all of our fears about the future, but also raising every expectation, the possibility to move ahead with creativity and redesign our own new self-definition to live and work in a new reality. During this hour, we are going to talk about business revolution. Please join me to listen to Ja-Nae Duane, and I'm going to present Ja-Nae to you with the following introduction. Tenemos la suerte de tener con nosotros a Ja-Nae Duane. Es brillante, tiene más de 20 años trabajando y se ha centrado en una misión: mejorar la vida de la mayor cantidad de personas posible. Esto ha hecho que se centre en ideas revolucionarias y se desarrollen programas que impactan. Actualmente, Ja-Nae es cofundadora de The Revolution Factor, una red global que permite ecosistemas de innovación en corporaciones, gobiernos y universidades. Es coautora del éxito de ventas de Hard Equation. Sobresale en la estrategia de innovación conectando con la responsabilidad social empresarial con los esfuerzos de innovación y la innovación abierta, que se conecta con las nuevas empresas. Ella ha tenido el placer de trabajar con empresas como Samsonite, y John Hackett. Ja-Nae está en la facultad de Northeastern University, Emerson College, Clark University y Clarity University. Bienvenida, Ja-Nae, te escuchamos.
Thank you so much. I mean, I don't even know how to follow up that beautiful introduction. Thank you. That was very kind. And thank you for having me here. There's a lot going on, as we all know. And good morning to everyone. It's so nice to have you here joining us. Nice to see those faces that I'm able to see. And I'm just curious, you know, as you're going through this talk with me, think through your own business, think through your own struggles, and then as we get into the question and answer portion of the talk, let's really try to dig in a little bit deeper into some of the next steps that you can take to help move your business forward. Because right now, what we're seeing is that many businesses are struggling. And they're struggling in a way that, that they just didn't expect. And if you're one of those companies that's struggling, well, I could tell you that you're not alone. Let's see, for some reason I can't move my screen. There we go. Everything that we know about our businesses and about our industries is that there are so many changes that so many things are actually going obsolete. Restrictions associated with COVID-19 are really putting many industries at risk, and many businesses are finding that they need to close their doors and go out of business. The pandemic and associated restrictions will hurt companies of all sizes, and revenues will start to dry up. Even companies that offer essential goods, such as consumer staples and healthcare, are expected to have significant changes to their revenue. A BCG survey revealed that nearly 80% of Spanish-speaking South American consumers plan to spend less in 2020, and that's a large number. Additionally, we're seeing some shifts in South American consumer behavior that's actually typical of what we're seeing globally. Consumers are spending more time online, but they're also looking for ways to do business with companies that they normally do business with, but do it online instead of having to go into person. And for some of the banks that I've talked to in Brazil, this is really problematic. And it's problematic because they're so used to doing business in person. You know, culturally, that's just what is done. However, consumers want digital banking options, and they want it immediately so that they don't have to go in person to do their banking. And so these are just some of the trends that we're seeing. Obviously, a rise in app use and content platform use, a rise in digital banking, a rise in e-commerce shopping, and anything in person, we're seeing significant drops as we would anticipate. So going to larger events, even traveling beyond a 3-mile radius is something that we're seeing a significant drop in. So though we would consider these shifts things that are associated with the pandemic, this shift that we're experiencing now actually has been going on for some time. We have been working and operating in a model that was created in the Industrial Revolution. The idea that a worker would come to the factory, would sit in the same seat and work at the same job doing the same thing from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then do the same thing over and over and day after day. And the thing is, well, that's just not how we work anymore. And that no longer exists. The factory model is dead. We are constantly connected to our phones, connected to our computers. We are working remotely. Jimena's a really great example. She right now is in South Africa, being able to present with me and share this knowledge with you. I mean, the way that we are linked now is completely different. And so this idea of this factory model is just obsolete. And so what we're seeing is that not only are our personal time and our work time blurred, but we're seeing that this pandemic has actually accelerated the process into us thinking through new business models. Like any black swan event, our systems are disrupted. And it has disrupted what we know for our companies as business as usual. The problem is that still so many of our business models and our systems associated with them are stuck in that old industrial revolution model of business. And really, if we do not make changes in the way that we approach business, well, then we may have to close our business. So, how can we make some of these important changes before this second wave of the pandemic hits in the fall, which is what they're predicting? Together, I will walk you through some high priority action steps that will not only get your company thinking more future forward, but also help you to revolutionize how you think about your business, where you move your business, and what that path might look like. So, though I can't see all of you, raise your hand if you're ready. Okay. All right, let's get started. So, as we chatted about earlier, our models are shifting. That includes the idea of this centralized business model where everyone comes to work in the same location, customers having only one role to buy from you, and your suppliers being placed around the world in order to save you money. This model is quickly being erased. And what we are seeing is this new way of doing business. We are moving into a world of distributed business models. Distributed business models are predominantly concerned with access. access to global talent, access to cost-effective manufacturing, and direct access to target consumers, but in an effective way. We're seeing more and more companies being forced to create this distributed model due to the pandemic. One of the major shifts that we're seeing happens to be with the workforce. We're seeing a wave of companies, including Twitter, move to a fully remote distributed workforce. And we will continue to see more and more companies do so in the future. These numbers will just continue to increase. However, I want to give you an example of a company that has had a distributed workforce for a long time, and that's Automatic. So Automatic owns WordPress, Tumblr, along with many, many other products. And they have been a distributed company for years with over 1,200 employees speaking over 77 languages, or excuse me, 93 languages in 77 different countries. And the thing is, they don't have an office. There is not one single office. Everyone works from home, or if they choose to, they can work elsewhere, like a co-working space. But there's not one office. And they work out of Zoom. They work with Slack. They work with Google Docs. And the team only comes together in person when they end up having a team retreat. Otherwise, it's all virtual. And they've been doing this for the past 15 years. For you and your business, think about ways in which you can take your centralized model and start to move it to a distributed one. Maybe it's your workforce. Maybe it has to do with your supply chain. Building off of a distributed business model, find ways to shorten your value chain. A major reason why we're seeing shortages through this pandemic is because companies have outsourced production to low-cost regions around the world in order to keep costs down. Well, I mean, that makes sense. The problem, though, is that that is based on historical data and historical forecasting, forecasting with historical data. And what it doesn't really take into account is disruptions, much like this pandemic that we're seeing here. It doesn't take into account black swan events. The reason why is that it doesn't have enough data in order to take those things into account. And so through this disruption, what we've seen, and maybe your company has been one of these companies, but we've seen companies start to scramble, trying to find ways to produce closer to home, try to find ways in order to find suppliers that are closer to home. And what we've seen over by where I live in Boston, Massachusetts, is that many companies have actually moved to using maker spaces as additive manufacturing so that they're able to build their products and their products right there and parts right there instead of having to ship them out. And they're still extremely cost effective. We're also seeing companies send materials and send files to customers directly who end up having 3D makers, 3D printers. The reason why is if a customer has that machine, all you have to do is supply them with the supplies that they need in order to print it. It changes the way that we view manufacturing. And so these are just some of the ways that you can end up shortening your value chain with 3D printing. An example of this is Formlabs. They're based here in Boston, and they are revolutionizing 3D printing. They're not only seeing an increase in 3D printing farms that are popping up in secondary and tertiary cities, but Formlabs themselves ended up receiving authorization from the government to 3D print and manufacture adapters for ventilators for hospitals here in the US. That is unprecedented. No one is doing that. And it changes the way in which we have access to materials and parts that we need and what production and manufacturing looks like. So take some of that and consider what are some ways in which you can shorten your value chain. So once you've taken some of that and identified some ways in which you can become more distributed and maybe some ways in which you can bring your supply chain and your value chain closer to home, the next thing you want to do is to get your team thinking and doing adaptive scenario planning. So adaptive scenario planning allows you not only to come up with best and worst case scenarios, but it allows you to look across all scenarios and identify where are they interlinked. So what are some of those problem areas? What are some of the areas that stay consistent? If you're seeing changes right now from the pandemic, what actually stays the same throughout another wave of this pandemic? Is your core business the same, or do you have to start to make some of those modifications? The key to doing some adaptive scenario planning is really to minimize any risks while identifying new opportunities for the future. Oop, and I went a little too far. Let me go back. So once you've looked across some of these multiple scenarios, identify not only where your industry is heading in the next year, but where's your industry heading because of these disruptions over the next 3 years? What are some of the opportunities that you're seeing over the next 3 years? And I wouldn't go farther than 3 years. Why? Well, obviously technology is changing dramatically and really is leveling the playing field for many folks. 2, the technology that's available now and the technology that you use now will change in a year. And as you go through your scenario planning, you'll end up having to change your strategy or alter it in about a year, probably less, to be honest. But some of the opportunities that you're seeing won't change. And so being able to look at what are those opportunities over the next 9 months? What are those opportunities over the next 12 months? What are the opportunities over the next 3 years? Will allow you to sort of set a North Star for yourself and then reverse engineer where you could start to take your company and what are some of those benchmarks that you need to hit or some of those technologies that you need to start to incorporate in order to head into an area that might be uncharted territory for you. So right now, if you're in a crowded market, if you're just focused on the lowest cost, if you're just focused on differentiating yourself by different features, then it's time to already look for a new market to be in. Why? Because why are you fighting over pennies when really there's a whole world to explore that this disruption has allowed you to start to think about? And it has leveled the playing field because it has allowed for everyone to scramble, everyone to figure out what comes next. So for you, it is time to start to think about what is a new market? What are those new opportunities? At the core, there's undiscovered value that your company has. And you might find as you start to do some of these scenario plannings that, you know, there is uncontested demand in a market that really doesn't have any competition and might actually give you new customers. A company that I think is doing this really well is Spatial. So the future of work is not Zoom. And if you think it's Zoom, well, then we can have a conversation about that. But it is the ability to work from anywhere and have holograms of your teammates in the same room as you. It's the ability, just like Iron Man, to be able to pull up a document and work on it in 3D in the center of your room. Now, there are other companies who are doing virtual reality, but not like Spatial. they allow you to use any device and be able to have a combination of virtual reality with just web conferencing the way that we are now, along with augmented reality. So they have found a new market with very little competition. How can you be forward thinking and identify where you can head with your company and within a new market so that you can really change what the future looks like? Ecosystems are helping to redefine and shape not only businesses, but the economy. As we move more digitally, it ends up allowing for the spread of opportunity, for more collaboration and convergence to occur and to accelerate, which then will accelerate whether or not a business succeeds or whether or not a business fails. Organizations are advancing towards more interactive relationships with their customers, with their business partners, with their suppliers. And so it allows for folks like your consumers to be able to co-create your products and your services with you. Now, there are many different forms an ecosystem can take. But what you want to do is identify ways in which you can create a dynamic ecosystem. How can your customers, your suppliers, your business partners learn from one another? How can you create access to new knowledge, access to new talent, access to new technology? And how can you create an ecosystem that gives you the leverage to be able to use that access, whether or not it is to create new markets, whether or not it is to be able to identify new customers, or even to create a new future for your business. Now, Patagonia is a really great example of a company who has created an ecosystem as well as a secondary market for their products. Customers can sell their used products and build relationships with other customers. This ecosystem not only attracts regular customers, but it also has attracted new customers. It has attracted new suppliers. It has attracted new distributors and has allowed for the secondary market to interact with one another. So for you, think about ways in which you can really create that sandbox, create that ecosystem so that you're moving your value away from just being an app. You're moving your value away from just being a platform, and you're truly providing an intersection for all of the stakeholders that you do business with. So, before we wrap up, there's one last thing to consider, and that is to be aware of unintended consequences. And what I want to do is I actually want to tell you a non-business example. So in preparation for the Olympics, a coach of a rowing team wanted to train his team on meditation. And he wanted to train his team on meditation because he wanted two things. He wanted to make them more in sync and be aware of one another, but he also wanted to enhance their rowing. So they went through this meditation training, and to be honest, it didn't go as the coach expected. Yes, the team became more synchronized with one another. However, what occurred was that there was less resistance, and that caused the team to actually go slower. Why? Well, because if you're teaching a team to be more in sync with one another and to be more aware of that, then they're less aware of the idea of winning. They really want to focus on the intention of being in sync with one another. They want to focus on what it means to actually row together. And so this harmony that the meditation created was the exact opposite effect of what the coach actually wanted. And so this is just a small example of how everything that we do has a rippling effect. So you can really go on marketing your business the same way, doing business the way that you normally do, and with the hope of getting the same result. However, the unintended consequences that may occur, well, they may be this. So you can continue to do the same thing in the same way, or you could take some of these small things that we just talked about today and really start to implement them into your business so that you can reimagine not only what the future of your business looks like, but revolutionize what the future of your industry looks like. Create new markets. Business is changing. Times are changing, and they're changing with or without us. And so for me, a quote that sort of sums this up is actually from Borges. He says that nothing is built on stone. All is built on sand. But we must build as if the sand were stone. So know that with everything changing, we must take this sand and build with it. We must take the sand and adapt with it. But there's opportunities everywhere. And know that anything is possible. But ultimately, it is your choice to decide on what you end up building that is made and seems like stone, but created with sand. You decide on what you create. You decide on what that foundation looks like and how adaptable it is. And really, at the end of the day, that choice will always be yours. And I hope you make the right one. With that, thank you for your time. And I say, let's open it up to questions.
Thank you, Ja-Nae. It was an amazing presentation, very inspiring. And now we are going to move through Q&A. So I invite everyone to ask questions to Ja-Nae to talk some things we can debate about this great presentation. Muy bien, tenemos una primera pregunta de Carlos Flores. Carlos nos pregunta, ¿qué proyección le da en cuanto a cambios tecnológicos a la educación escolar presencial? Él está hablando de un tema de educación, en este caso, y la tecnología, y claramente hay una modificación del patrón, y su pregunta tiene que ver con cómo estos cambios tecnológicos y qué proyección existe en torno a la educación escolar presencial. Ja-Nae.
Yes, Carlos, very big question, and a question very close to my heart. Obviously, as someone who is an educator, this question is very important to me. As someone who has a 3-year-old son, this question is very important to me. So I will answer with 2 things that I am seeing, and I will start with the short term, and then I will move to where I see the future of education. Short term, what we are seeing a lot of, besides scrambling, is our schools really identifying ways in which they can start to use new technology. And so actually some of the research that I'm in right now with 2 different research teams is identifying what are the differences in learning outcomes when you are learning something via Zoom like this or via a webinar like this, versus if you have something that is augmented reality on your phone, versus learning the same thing with virtual reality or 3D, specifically 360 video, using a Google Cardboard. The reason why is here in the United States, and I can't speak for other countries, but what we're seeing is schools really focusing on varied scenarios. So one scenario is that everyone goes back to school and is in person, but is socially distanced. We then see the hybrid model of some teachers and some students are in person, but keeping them smaller classes, and some people are online learning. And then we're seeing the third scenario of everyone moving to online. And so one of the reasons why this research is so important is because for those, no matter what the scenario is, for those who may have to be more remote, identifying which technology will provide the strongest connection to the learning outcomes is really important. And so, so identifying where those differences are really important. And right now, there's just not enough data out there, or there hasn't been enough research out there for us to know that. So that's a large initiative that is moving forward in education. What we are going to see are, we're going to see more masks for those who are in person and delivering education. We're going to see, much like what we're seeing now here in the United States, where you go in certain doors, you go out certain doors, there's going to be socially distanced. We'll see less in-person collaboration, where you're working in small teams and working together, which to me is very problematic. And so I think that's why identifying whether or not learning outcomes are stronger with a certain technology is really important. Also, what we're noticing is an exploration of how people are trying to achieve the same types of outcomes within their classrooms. So trying to use different methods instead of just the same. Some people like to lecture. So how do you get students to almost teach themselves around a topic, but sort of guide them in a way so that it ends up being more individual learning? So we're seeing a bit of that as well. Where I see the future heading when it comes to education, I see a major shift in education. I see that we are, first of all, we're lifelong learners. We know that. You know, you're on this webinar because you're looking to, or I'm making the assumption that you're looking to learn something, but for you, you're connecting dots of maybe the knowledge that you have with maybe some new knowledge, so that you can apply it in some way. What we're going to start to see, much to what I talked about with the dynamic ecosystems, are more small, tightly knit groups of individuals who sort of learn on their own. This structure that we have with higher education and education itself is going to go through a major transformation where many, many schools will close. And only those who are able to, one, start to adapt different technologies, two, can start to individualize the way that people learn and create a path for them, and three, allow for learning to happen throughout one's entire life. Those are the institutions that will stay, because they will know, and I'm already starting to see it here in the US, they know that they need to start to make that shift. And if they don't make that shift now, then the infrastructure is going to collapse. And we're seeing it crumble right before us. I hope that helps, Carlos.
Thank you, Janae. Amazing answer. We are moving forward. The next question is from Eder Ortega y dice lo siguiente. Si existe una empresa e-commerce que es local, no es internacional, solamente vende en su país, ¿cómo puede estar en este momento capacitada para competir con empresas grandes como Amazon o Alibaba en otros lugares del mundo?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I think it depends on the type of e-commerce company we're speaking of. When I think about both Amazon and Alibaba, there are specific items that I think that get sold. Depending on what this e-commerce platform sells, what they can do is that they can differentiate by focusing on, if they're focused on a local market, I think I'll need to know more about the company itself, but if they're focused on a local market, then what they can do is leverage the small mom and pop shops, the small businesses that are there, and the items that they sell that maybe Amazon and Alibaba don't necessarily sell. What you can also do is differentiate around customer service. So obviously Amazon has and is notorious for horrible customer service. And so if you have an issue, it takes a long time. There's a ton of issues with the products that are being sold on Amazon, and they understand that this is an issue right now, where either they're fake items or they're not a real company. So there's just a lot of fraud on some of these larger e-commerce platforms. Another way for your e-commerce platform that you're speaking of to differentiate would be around validation of that product or that service. Because the idea here is around trust with the consumer. At the end of the day, people do business with companies that they trust. And so if you can show that you know where those products are coming from, if you can show that it's supporting local business that maybe they would normally go to, but they can't, if you can provide a high quality customer service for them, if there is an issue, being accessible whenever there's a problem, that is how you start to chip away. But the thing with any company, and I stress this to the startups that I work with, is that there's no quick win. You have to figure out what is your long game. And so how do you start to chip away at some of these bigger players? And really, it's through some of these differentiators that I just mentioned. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, Janae, very helpful. Very interesting, the point about trust in the brands and building trust. That I think is very hard. We will move to the next question. That is a question from Miguel Garcia. And he says, how can you measure on children and teenagers the progress and advance of digital education?
I'm sorry, of digital what?
Education.
Oh, education. Oh, and I will say that I am not, as an educator, I teach college. And so I want to preface my answer by saying that I'm not an expert in early education. So with that being said, so please know that. I don't ever want to pretend that I'm an expert in something that I am not. One of the things that I guess the question I have is, are we looking across the board at multiple children, or if we're looking at individual progress? I think I asked this question because I think that this is at its heart one of the biggest problems with education. We are constantly, as a scholar and as a researcher, I get this problem. but we're constantly looking at the median. We're constantly looking at where is that baseline, but that baseline across all students instead of that baseline for that one individual student. Part of where education needs to head is really assessing the individual child. Where were they before they started either a school year or a course or a specific subject matter? What are the learning objectives that they need to achieve over the course of that class or that school year? And then what is their progress at the end? And the reason why is if we continue to bundle every student together, we're not actually solving the problem of creating highly impactful educational experiences for children. The other thing that I would say here, and not only children, but young adults and adults. The other thing that I would say here is we as humans are very quick to learn. And so we'll take in information. Sometimes we have two systems that our brain, that processes information with our brain. We have our first system, or our automatic system, and then we have our second system, which is our reflective system. And so much of how we teach, as well as this is compounded with, say, social media, is that we're looking for the immediate, like what's that immediate response? And the thing is that when we start to learn something, we really need to move that information over to our second system, our reflective system, so that we're able to synthesize it with the other information that we have, and then be able to either start to make connections for ourselves and or start to synthesize with a small group of people who might be, say, on the same, working towards the same goal, or maybe in the same, at the same place of learning something similar. And so for children and young adults, I highly recommend creating small intensive groups of children and young adults who are in sort of the same place, who either are looking to learn the same thing, but are, sort of have the same base level of knowledge, and allow them to start to explore, but also fail together as they learn. It's only when we start to individualize and then move to more intentional learning in this way that we're really going to see an impact in how children and young adults not only take information, but start to create new opportunities for themselves in the world.
Thank you, Ja-Nae. Very clear. We have like a ton of questions. The people is really, really interested in your answers. I'm moving forward the next one. This is from Luis Macias. It's in Spanish, so I'm going to switch languages.
Okay.
Hola, Ja-Nae. Gracias por la presentación. ¿Cuáles crees que serán en el futuro el modelo de trabajo de las empresas? ¿Cuáles serían las competencias y las tecnologías para lograr un efectivo trabajo remoto? Lo voy a repetir. ¿Cuáles crees que serán en el futuro el modelo de trabajo de las empresas y cuáles serían las competencias y tecnologías para lograr un efectivo trabajo remoto?
Wow, another big question. What I love about these questions is that they're so big. You know, the future of education, the future of work, and I wish I had a crystal ball. However, a few things that I will say, because some of my previous work was, and particularly my work with the Revolution Factory, a large part of what we've done has been to train companies in what we call, or what was called, VUCA, you know, volatile, uncertain environments that are ambiguous, that really force you to start to think about, okay, what do I do when something happens? And really, as we look at this pandemic, something has happened. And so a lot of what I recommend companies to focus on, which they don't, by the way, But as far as skill building, individuals need to build up their entrepreneurial skills. And I will tell you why. The future of work, in many ways, as we move to this remote virtual work, employees will find that many of them will end up having to be entrepreneurs. The reason why, as you start to let go of some of those offices, some of those centralized locations, companies are going to realize that they don't need the overhead of an employee when they can have subcontractors work for them. And so a person might have been an employee for a company for, say, 15 years, and now they find that they're a contractor for that same company. And so what we're finding, and we call this the liquid workforce. And so what we're finding is that many individuals don't necessarily have the entrepreneurial skills that they need to be able to navigate what it means to work for oneself while working for a company as a contractor. And so you're going to find that many individuals, one, become entrepreneurs and end up having a portfolio career. What I mean by that is you may have not only this company as one of your clients, but you may find that you're doing something similar but slightly different for another company. You might find that you are doing something similar but slightly different for a third company. And the idea is that you're building your skill sets, your individual skill set, as you're starting to also build a business, which is probably something that many employees would never even consider. The other thing that is not taught at all to employees that I recommend individuals to learn is how to build up self-resilience. Now, self-resilience is not necessarily something that is, I will say, easily learned. Everyone comes at it from a different way, but we are going to find that we have more disruptions like this. And as we move to this future of work that is distributed, where people are either subcontractors or do not have a centralized location, they really need to find sort of that inner strength of, wow, I'm working from home now. I never had to work from home before. How do I start to navigate that? Oh, we're dealing with another wave of this pandemic. How do I make sure that I'm able to stay as mentally healthy as possible for not only myself, but maybe my family? So resilience is something else, another important skill that I highly recommend that individuals focus on. As far as technology, again, I think that spatial, so if you go to spatial.io, that's a really great example of how I think virtual work from home is going to start to look like over the next 2 to 3 years. But then we're going to see that change even more. And we might find that we are all working out of a virtual reality and or some type of mixed reality, much like what spatial is starting to explore right now. Great question.
Thank you, Janae. Yeah, great questions and great answers also. This is like the resilience part, and all the future is about a chapter of Black Mirror. The next question is about something very proper of Peru. We are going to talk about the trust in internet and how to make business in a country where no one trusts the system. I'm going to switch again to Spanish. Esta es una pregunta de Wilber Delgado y dice lo siguiente: aquí en el Perú muchas empresas han dado un giro a su negocio y ahora realizan una venta virtual de víveres, por ejemplo. ¿El negocio por plataformas será una opción en el futuro? ¿Cómo llegar a la mayoría de personas en el Perú si hay desconfianza al momento de comprar por la web?
Yes, very, very big question. Again, I love these questions, and this is a hard one to answer. Well, they're all hard to answer, but this one in particular, I don't have a great response for, and let me explain why. The problem that, though different from what my Peruvian friends have told me, this problem of manipulation, of misinformation, of deception, not only from companies, but also from outside parties who are sort of hijacking our cognitive biases and hijacking our cognitive systems, rather. This is what we call the new wave of information warfare. And I wish I could say that this is going to get better, but it's actually going to get worse. So for companies who are already sort of struggling with this, and a culture that's already struggling with this, here are some of my recommendations. One, something to really consider is how can you co-build trust with some of your customers? The reason why is you can say whatever you want, but it's really the word of mouth from other customers that's really going to drive your business. And so as we think about, as we move digitally, we think, oh, there's this big landscape. But at the end of the day, really looking for some of those core evangelists that you have that really believe in your company, that really believe in the products and services that you provide, use them to help spread the word. Use them to help provide information if there is either, say that there is, abuse of power or distrust, or if there are privacy issues. Allow them to help point out where some of your maybe digital vulnerabilities are, so that, and then show other customers that you're doing this with customers. This is part of what it's like to create an ecosystem. This is what it's like to build trust in a digital age. We no longer build in a vacuum or build it and open the doors and they will come. We need to engage our customers and our consumers in building our companies with us. Because if we do not do this, then there's no way our companies are going to survive. So think about what customers you have that you can start to leverage now. And maybe you have a customer advisory group to start to identify some of this low-hanging fruit where you can leverage new customers, maybe provide better quality service, or maybe provide better quality products or even new products. That is how I recommend starting to move in this direction as we really fight a much larger battle as we move digitally.
Thank you, Ja-Nae. We have a lot of questions, but I have to close the session right now because of the timing. Thank you for everyone for participating. Thank you, Ja-Nae, because you have been awesome. And for me, it's such a great experience being here in South Africa while you're in Boston talking with Peruvian people and people around the world in this conversation. It was so great. I want to let everyone listening that you have access to a certificate that must arrive in your mail soon. And Ja-Nae, thanks a lot for being with us. You are more than welcome in Peru whenever you want. And I also want to thank UTEC, the amazing team of the UTEC University, Singularity University, and Red Rock Rebels. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Para quienes siguen con nosotros, miren la pantalla, porfa, y van a ver que hay una secuencia de este tipo de charlas con acceso a webinars, cafés digitales, certificados de cumplimiento generados por UTEC. O sea, que estén atentos a todo lo que viene con UTEC, Singularity U y Red Rock Rebels. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Jimena. Muchas gracias a todos. Que tengan una feliz semana y hasta una siguiente oportunidad.
wait on other people to be what you've been called to be. You can't wait on their affirmation. You can't wait on their approval. You can't wait on their support. Sometimes you've just got to run and look behind you and say, everybody who wants to run, run, but I can't stop running because you're not running with me. Listen to me, hear me. You can't stop chasing your dream just because somebody in your life won't chase it with you. You can't stop believing in yourself just because somebody in your life won't believe in you. You can't stop chasing the dreams of your life just because when you know when you do it, you're going to have to do it all by yourself. Thank you.